Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Angelica Benson, Director of Development and Outreach for Lindamood-Bell Learning Processes. If you are a parent looking for learning solutions, you are in the right place and you're not alone. Today, I'll be talking about how together we can conquer learning losses and make a difference for your child at Lindamood-Bell this summer. Lindamood-Bell was founded by Patricia Lindamood and Nancy Bell. For over 35 years, we have helped thousands of students overcome learning challenges. Now we want to help individuals overcome the learning challenges created by the pandemic. First of all, a Stanford study finds reading skills among young students stalled during the pandemic. Results from a nationwide reading assessment show that the students' development of oral reading fluency largely stopped in spring of 2020 after the abrupt school closures brought on by COVID-19. This is important for us to know as we go through the webinar together today. The direct quote was, "It seems these students in general didn't develop any reading skills during the spring. Their growth stalled when schooling was interrupted and remained stagnant through the summer." And we know today that these losses have continued and even increased for so many students since that time, not only in the United States, but around the world. In fact, with the disruption of education systems globally, UNESCO estimates that 90% of all learners have been impacted. So let's look at what we can do together to close learning losses. One of the things we are doing to address this concern is we continue to offer our student learning ability evaluations and our instructional model virtually, so we can continue to close learning losses in reading comprehension and math. So whether the instruction is in person in one of our learning centers worldwide, or whether it's blended or virtual online, we can make a difference for students wherever you are. Here is one of those students, Liam, who received instruction from Lindamood-Bell in 2021 during the pandemic. His mother writes, "According to his teacher, nearly all the students in Liam's class were experiencing significant learning loss from their time remote. Liam, on the other hand, made significant gains." Liam was the only student in his class to read the words on the board, raise his hand to offer answers, and read aloud to his group. His confidence is soaring. So how did we do it? Well, we started with intensive sensory cognitive instruction, and we can conquer learning loss and improve basic skills in a few weeks of intensive instruction, literally 4 sessions a day, 5 days a week. And we know the results are significant if the instruction is targeted to develop the sensory cognitive processing, which is the foundation for language and literacy skills. So when we can develop that sensory cognitive processing, we can make huge and lasting impacts for our students. And here's a quote from one of our students, Nico, that shows that exact thing. He said, "When I was in first grade, I had a very hard time learning to read. My parents sent me to a reading summer camp at Lindamood-Bell. Their positive way of teaching changed my life and taught me how to read. Their influence will last a lifetime." Nico's gains in basic skills represent typical gains after weeks of intensive instruction. Let's look at what these typical gains are. But for families who are seeking learning solutions, in addition to our own student results, which I'll be sharing with you next, we have participated in a range of neurological and behavioral research studies with leading researchers and educational universities across the United States. This means that you can trust that we have the right knowledge and expertise to help you conquer learning losses. Now let's look at some of our students. We have collected pre-post student data on 25,186 students since 2008. The majority of these have struggled here in reading or comprehension. Some have a combination of weaknesses in both areas, and there are some that struggle in math. So I'm going to share some highlights to give you a snapshot of the range of the types of students that we see and the kinds of learning changes that we can make. This is 9,598 decoding only students. So these are students that struggle in reading. On the bottom here, you can see this is a range of reading measures: symbol imagery, phoneme awareness, word attack, word recognition, reading accuracy and fluency, and written language comprehension and vocabulary. So when we look at these, everything they performed at prior to instruction is noted with dark blue bars. We're wanting to look at, were they in the average or the normal range, which is from the 25th to the 75th percentile. Anything below that line is indicated as a weakness for students, and anything at or above the 75th would be looked at as a strength. And as you can see, most of their reading scores fell at the low average or below average range. In spite of their vocabulary here, which can be a measure of learning potential, as high as the 68th percentile. So after 109 hours of instruction, these students on average were 9.2 in age. After that, those hours of instruction to develop symbol imagery through a Seeing Stars program, these students made statistically significant growth, as noted here by the light blue bars, across all reading measures, including written language comprehension, and even their vocabulary improved. So when we look at the average standard score changes as well in these areas, that will tell us if these changes were small, medium, or large. And these gains have been noted as large gains across the board. Here we are looking at those students with a prior diagnosis of dyslexia. There are 2,483 of these students, an average age of 10.2. Here again in the dark blue bars, you can see their scores prior to instruction on a range of reading measures. These students are scoring much lower than the prior group, and actually interesting, their potential is even higher coming in than the other group. Our goal again is to see if they're in that average or normal range, 25th to the 75th, and can we, through instruction, help to develop those areas so they can learn to that potential. So after 121.6 hours of instruction in our Seeing Stars program, indeed, we were able to see very significant growth, many going to well within that average range across the board. And many of these students might not be considered to have dyslexia when you look at their individual improvements in reading. All right, now let's shift gears to look at our comprehension-only students. These are students that can read but have difficulty comprehending what they read. Here we have 5,882 students. You can see an average age of 12.4. Pre-test, their vocabulary, word opposites, and written language comprehension are at the low average to below average range. And after 102.9 hours of instruction here, we saw really nice growth across the board, and these students are now performing to their potential in comprehension. And finally, we have identified a subset of students, 745 of them, that have a much more significant weakness in comprehension. And the question we are asking here is, can we make a meaningful change in learning potential for these students who are much more challenged, as you can see, the 8th percentile here in comprehension, well below that average range after instruction. So after 104.1 hours of instruction, indeed, you can see we made very significant growth here, which was commensurate with the potential for this group. We certainly were able to make a big difference here and close the learning gap. So how are we able to increase learning potential and performance? Pat Lindamood said years ago, the brain can only receive information from our senses, and it is a multisensory organ. So if the brain can only receive information from our senses, it is there that we need to focus our intensive instruction, and more specifically to focus on what Pat and Nancy call sensory cognitive functions. There are sensory cognitive functions foundational to all learning. The sensory input of imagery is a primary sensory cognitive function. Our instructional experience, we discovered along the way, aligned with Dr. Alan Pavio's theory of cognition known as dual coding theory. Dual coding theory states that our cognition is proportional to the extent that we can integrate imagery and language. They call the coding mechanisms of mental representations, known as imagery, and language are integrated. Dual coding theory also tells us that there are individual differences in our ability to integrate imagery and language, and thus there are individual differences in our learning performance. So when we look at our own programs, There are two types of imagery that we strive to develop. One is parts and the second is wholes. Here's the parts. This is symbol imagery, and it's our ability to image symbols or letters in our mind's eye for the sounds and letters within words on the page. The second type of imagery are wholes or concept imagery, and that's our ability to create an imaged gestalt or a whole in our mind's eye for oral and written language. Let's look a little bit further at these. When we talk about symbol imagery, and we're able to see the letters in our mind's eye, in this case, the student is seeing those letters S-H-O-R-T for the word short, we're developing his orthographic memory for that word because he's got symbol imagery, and that will help him to read and spell it much more easily. Many students have difficulty in this area, and we find that their symbol imagery is underdeveloped. So here are the symptoms of weak symbol imagery and phoneme awareness. Students can have one or more of difficulties in these areas. We often see weak word attack skills. Students may be able to sound out shorter words or single syllable words, but when the words get more complex and into the multisyllabic level, this is often where their word attack skills may break down. They also struggle at recognizing words, and very commonly they have difficulty memorizing and retaining sight words, those high frequency words that we need to have memorized for reading fluency and accuracy on the page. When those words are difficult for them to recognize, reading becomes slow and laborious. They often may guess as they're reading, which can greatly impact their comprehension. In addition to decoding or reading weaknesses, we see difficulty in spelling, reading fluency, self-monitoring and correcting as well. Now let's look at the other type of imagery, concept imagery. The goal here is to see a picture in our mind's eye, like this student who is visualizing the word clown. We know as we increase the language from one word to a sentence and we increase the complexity of that language, that it can be more difficult for our students with weak concept imagery to comprehend. For example, let's look at this passage. What do these words make you picture? If a big black horse ran across the green field, with his head held high, his hoofs pounded the ground faster and faster. Then suddenly he was in the air as he effortlessly leapt over the tall white fence. If you were able to picture the horse and create a dynamic movie in your mind's eye, that's your concept imagery in action. Unfortunately, for many of our students, they're weak in concept imagery, and they tell us that those words that can go in one ear and out the other, and they don't stick. They often will be able to process parts or pieces of the information, but will have a difficult time integrating it into a gestalt or a whole. And that can be both from oral language or written language. Here. So as that oral language and written language come in here, we can teach individuals how to image a gestalt, and that will prevent language from going in one ear and out the other. Once they can integrate the parts into a gestalt, we can use that as a tool for higher order thinking, which are so critical in school and in life. Those include main ideas, conclusions, cause-effect relationships, inferences, predictions, evaluations, etc. So here are some symptoms of weak concept imagery. Students may have one or more of these difficulties. Very commonly, we see weak written language or reading comprehension. Students may reread information more than one time and continue to get parts. Sometimes they may even memorize the words as a way to compensate for their weakness in understanding it. We do see that often. Students also struggle to comprehend oral language around them. That often goes hand in hand with following directions, oral directions, which would require a student to take each step of the directions or the parts, image the parts, sequence the parts, and execute them accordingly. We see difficulty with critical and logical thinking and problem solving, difficulty with expressive language, both orally and writing. difficulty interpreting social situations, cause and effect. And if the weakness is severe enough, we may have students that have a number of different diagnoses, including ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and or hyperlexia. So this Venn diagram shows our reading paradigm. The interior gray circles, here we have the auditory, the visual, and the language domain, are critical subcomponent parts of the reading process. We think of these as subsets to the greater set, which is comprehension here. So of course, we don't read just to read. The purpose to read is to comprehend. So these inner circles, again, are subsets of that. So, and we know that the sensory cognitive functions underlie each of these component parts of reading. For example, our concept imagery is necessary as a foundation for comprehension. So we'll draw that here. For word attack skills and phonemic awareness, here, phonemic awareness, symbol imagery, those underlie your strength and ability. In the auditory domain, when we look at the visual domain, here we use our symbol imagery for word recognition, sight words, and spelling. Down here for contextual reading, vocabulary, we have our symbol imagery again here. So if we are weak in any one of these underlying sensory cognitive functions, you can have a weakness that manifests in any of these subcomponent parts, which will impact your ability to learn to your potential. So let's put all of this together. In our learning centers, we help families look further at these underlying sensory cognitive functions and see where they might be causing learning challenges for their child. So this is our imagery and language processing spectrum. You can see we have symbol imagery on the left and concept imagery on the right. We know symbol imagery is critical to strength in these interior circles, and we need it for decoding. If you are weak enough in symbol imagery, you may be way over here on our spectrum, and you may come in labeled with dyslexia here. But students can have a mild, moderate, or a severe weakness in symbol imagery. And the same is true with concept imagery, our circle here. You may have a weak, moderate, or severe difficulty with comprehension, which may put you all the way over here. And if that's the case, again, you may have come in with a label of hyperlexia or autism spectrum disorder. So let's look at a couple of real students. To talk more about this, we have Buzz and Natalie. So here's Buzz. He was 12 and a half when he came to us in 7th grade. And his parents told us at the end of 6th grade, Buzz hated reading. Despite improved phonological processing from many phonologically based reading programs he had had, you can see a very big strength here. In spite of that, he still couldn't read text easily and accurately. And his teacher said he can sound out words better, but he still can't read. So let's look at his learning ability evaluation. We see Buzz as a student with very high learning potential, as noted by his receptive vocabulary. However, when we get him reading on the page, this is his reading comprehension, you can see that there's a big gap there, and he's not able to learn commensurate to his potential. In spite, again, of some very strong skills in this auditory domain here, he's struggling at the 37th in the visual domain with word recognition. And when we get him reading on the page, you can see things really fall apart for him with reading rate and accuracy and fluency at the 16th percentile, which are skills down here. So Buzz is a student that has a lot of strength in this circle and weaknesses in the other two. And we know that that's greatly impacting his performance. After coming to our learning center, he received instruction to develop symbol imagery. We did teach him to read. He went on to graduate from high school and college as well. All right, so the polar opposite of Buzz is Natalie. So though Natalie learned easily to read in her early grades in school, by 4th grade, she was sick before going to school. And moving her to the front of the classroom and having other accommodations didn't seem to help her performance. So she was a student that had very high functions here. So you can see her learning ability evaluation, very strong potential at the 86th percentile, and all of those interior subcomponent parts of reading over 84th percentile, extremely high for her. However, when we asked her what she was reading on the page, you can see she was at the 2nd percentile. So clearly we saw a very big gap, big weakness in concept imagery here. So after coming to our learning centers and getting instruction to develop concept imagery, Natalie also went on to graduate successfully from high school and college. So what can we do to make a difference? Where should we start? The first step is a learning ability evaluation so that we can make an accurate diagnosis about a student's learning needs. The learning ability evaluation pinpoints underlying strengths and weaknesses in language and literacy. It lasts 2 to 4 hours long. It's a battery of standardized and nationally normed assessments with a 1-hour consultation. And Mary, an elementary school principal, described it as similar to getting a fingerprint of your child's unique learning profile. So after that, the second thing to do is to get individualized intensive instruction based on that diagnosis. That is 1-to-1, 5 days per week, 4 sessions a day, the duration of which would be tailored to a student's unique learning profile. So here's what this instruction looks like. What we are trying to do in this instruction is to use language to develop symbol imagery and bring it to a conscious level. So here is Nancy asking Buzz, what letters do you picture for IP? And Buzz is generating the imagery in his mind's eye. He's not seeing it in front of him. And he is able to identify the letters that he sees very easily. And of course, we know that will build his orthographic memory, and we can apply the symbol imagery process over to real words and reading in context. Now let's switch gears to concept imagery. For concept imagery, our language has to shift and change. We don't ask students like Natalie, what letters do you picture? We ask what those words make you picture. And we want her to see that movie in her mind's eye. So asking those kinds of questions, what do those words make you picture, will help explicitly develop concept imagery. We may start with developing concept imagery with a single word and move to single sentences and multiple sentences and paragraphs, paragraph to paragraphs, paragraph to paragraph. All the while asking what do those words make you picture and using those imagery skills to develop her higher order thinking as well. So we know sometimes a comprehension weakness, like Natalie's, is harder to identify in the classroom. And often these students may fly under the radar, all the while getting further behind. So this is what a mother said about her daughter after she went through the visualizing and verbalizing program to develop her concept imagery. She said, the daughter that I see now loves to read. Lindamood-Bell was able to provide the right setting, instructors, and resources to aid in her comprehension deficit and build her self-esteem that was robbed by years of wrong placement and diagnosis. So to summarize, we know from our own student results and our behavioral neurological research findings that it is possible for all students to learn to their potential. And now we have learned the importance of the Imagery Language Foundation for reading and comprehension. For parents and families who are looking for learning solutions for your child, you might ask yourself, which of these areas of imagery are a strength or a weakness for your child? And does your child have a little bit of a weakness like Buzz, or a little bit of a weakness like Natalie? We see students with a combination of both weaknesses, and now you know that we can help you identify these weaknesses and create them as strengths in your child. So moving forward, I think together we have a chance to address some of the challenges that the pandemic caused and make a difference, like by closing learning losses. And I want to conclude here with a final thought from Nancy Bell. She said, if we measure learning ability, differentiate the diagnosis so it's not a one-size-fits-all, and provide instruction to develop the sensory cognitive function of imagery, students can make significant gains in reading in weeks of instruction, conquer learning loss, and experience more success in school and in life. So from all of us at Lindamood-Bell, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for joining me today. I hope that you'll stay in touch. I invite you to visit our website for information about next steps, as well as our published research findings. Thank you again and have a great day. Bye.